Most men who claim to understand Russian women have never actually understood them at all. They've built entire belief systems around rumors, outdated cliches, and second-hand stories. And the result? Thousands of real connections shattered before they even begin, because someone decided a stereotype was more reliable than the truth. Here's what's strange. The myths about Russian women aren't just wrong. They're psychologically backwards. What most people believe is essentially the opposite of how the female psychology actually works in that cultural context. Stay with us through this video. By the end, you won't just know what the myths are. You'll understand why they form, who benefits from keeping them alive, and what the psychology underneath actually looks like. We live in a world flooded with content about types of women, what they want, how they think, what they respond to. And Russian women in particular have become one of the most mythologized groups on the planet, featured in dating advice, pop culture, and even academic discussions with wildly conflicting narratives. The problem isn't just misinformation, it's that these myths quietly shape behavior. Men approach, interact, and relate to women through the lens of what they believe, and when that lens is distorted, everything goes wrong. This video is about correcting that lens. We're going to break down the most persistent psychological myths about Russian women, show you the real data and cultural context, and give you a far more respectful and accurate understanding of who these women actually are. Let's begin. The first myth is perhaps the most widespread, that Russian women are cold, distant, and emotionally unavailable. Walk down any street in Moscow or St. Petersburg. Don't smile at strangers. Don't make small talk with cashiers. From the outside, especially to Western observers, this can read as emotional coldness, even hostility. But here's what's actually happening. Russian culture operates on a fundamental psychological distinction that many Western cultures have largely abandoned: the distinction between public and private emotional space. In Russian psychology and social norms, emotional openness is reserved for trusted relationships. It is not something scattered freely across strangers and acquaintances. Dr. Petrenko, a leading figure in Russian cultural psychology, has written extensively about the concept of dusha, the soul, as the core of Russian emotional identity. The soul is protected. It is not worn on the sleeve. But when it opens to someone trusted, the depth of emotional connection that follows is extraordinary. So the cold exterior isn't absence of emotion. It's the guardian of deep emotion. Misreading this as coldness is one of the most common and most costly mistakes men make. And it leads us directly to the next myth. Here's the one that causes the most damage. The idea that Russian women are materialistic, that they pursue foreign men specifically for financial security. This myth is so persistent that it has its own cultural ecosystem, dating forums, warning articles, even documentaries built around it. And yes, like any stereotype, it contains a sliver of statistical reality. But the psychological picture is far more complex. Russia went through a period of extreme economic instability in the 1990s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union. For an entire generation of women who grew up during this period, financial stability wasn't a luxury, it was a survival concern. The psychological imprint of that era didn't vanish overnight. What researchers in behavioral psychology call resource-sensitive mate preferences emerged strongly in populations that experienced resource scarcity. This isn't unique to Russia. It's been documented across Eastern Europe, post-war populations, and developing economies worldwide. But, and this is the critical part, when economic conditions stabilize, those preferences shift. Modern Russian women, particularly educated urban women under 35, consistently rank emotional intelligence, intellectual connection, and shared values higher than financial status in partner evaluations. The gold digger myth doesn't describe Russian female psychology. It describes one historical moment, misapplied as a permanent truth. And the real irony? The men most likely to be used financially are often the ones who lead with money as their primary attraction signal, signaling that financial transaction is how they understand connection. But that's only half the story. Here's something almost no one talks about. Many of these myths, the coldness, the materialism, the submissiveness, don't just exist because of ignorance. They exist because they serve certain types of men. Think about it. If you believe Russian women are cold, you never have to do the emotional work of truly connecting with one. If you believe they're gold diggers, you can explain away every rejection without examining your own behavior. If you believe they're submissive, you can enter a relationship expecting compliance rather than partnership. The myths create a convenient psychological framework that requires nothing from the person believing them. And this is where it gets deeply interesting. The men most likely to hold these myths tightly are also the men most likely to struggle in any intercultural relationship. Not because of cultural difference, but because they've used myths as a replacement for curiosity. Real understanding of any person, regardless of nationality, requires curiosity, not categorization. Let's talk about the submissive myth directly, because it's the one most likely to derail a real relationship. The idea that Russian women are naturally more traditional, more obedient, and more interested in domestic roles than Western women is partly rooted in cultural observation. Russia does have strong cultural currents around family, femininity, and gender roles. This is real. But traditional and submissive are not the same thing. Russian women score remarkably high on what psychologists measure as assertiveness in close relationships. Studies from Moscow State University comparing interpersonal communication styles found that Russian women are significantly more likely to express direct disagreement with a partner in private settings than many Western counterparts who avoid conflict to maintain social harmony. The traditional values coexist with fierce independence of thought and high personal standards. A Russian woman who values family and home is not surrendering her identity into it. She's choosing it, and she will let you know very clearly if her standards aren't being met. Men who approach these women expecting quiet compliance discover very quickly that they've misread the entire situation. The final myth is perhaps the most seductive. That Russian women are exotic, mysterious, fundamentally different, almost from another world. This myth is the prettiest one, so people hold on to it the longest. But here's the truth. The sense of mystery doesn't come from difference. It comes from unfamiliarity. When you don't understand someone's cultural context, communication style, and psychological background, they seem mysterious. That's not their quality. It's your information gap. When that gap closes, when you learn about the emotional culture, the historical context, the values framework, the mystery dissolves into something far more interesting. A real, complex, three-dimensional person. And real people, understood deeply, are more compelling than any myth. Here's the deepest insight of this entire video. Every myth we've broken down today has something in common. They all flatten Russian women into a type rather than treating them as individuals with specific psychology, specific histories, and specific inner worlds. Respectful attraction, attraction that actually leads somewhere real, begins with exactly the opposite move. It begins with the recognition that you are meeting a person, not a category. The psychological research on intercultural relationships consistently shows that relationships built on genuine curiosity about a specific person, not a generalized fascination with their nationality, have dramatically better outcomes on every metric: satisfaction, longevity, emotional security. The men and women who form the deepest cross-cultural bonds aren't the ones who read the most dating advice. They're the ones who ask the most questions, listened the most carefully, and resisted the urge to decide what someone was before truly knowing them. That's not just wisdom for intercultural relationships. That's the foundation of every meaningful human connection. So here's where we land. Russian women are not cold. They're emotionally precise. They're not uniformly materialistic. They are historically informed. They are not submissive. They are selectively assertive. And they're not mysterious. They're simply not yet understood. The myths were never really about them. They were always about the person doing the imagining. The moment you replace myth with genuine curiosity, everything changes. If this video gave you something real to think about, consider sharing it. Because the fewer people walking around with these distortions, the better the conversations we're all capable of having. Like, subscribe, and if you want to go deeper, our next video explores the psychology of cross-cultural relationships in ways that will genuinely change how you approach connection. Watch it next.